The key idea we're going to look at this time is the question of support. And I mean that in two particular aspects. So when you stand, or really anything that you do, but you're in the field of gravity, you're on Earth, you have some kind of supporting surface below you. Now, quite often, that's standing upright and you have the surface of the ground under your feet. And that's the situation that we're going to be considering today. Well, so the quality of the contact that you have is going to determine how hard you have to work. So as a different kind of an example, think that you're riding a bike, and then are your tires inflated or not? Well, if the tires aren't fully inflated, then there's a way that as you ride the bike, you're actually kind of sinking into the ground, and then you're having to fight that flat tire. You're having to sort of pull the wheel up out of the ground with every effort you make to pedal the bike. It's more work, right? So if the bike is fully inflated and it has that lift, then the energy that you put into pedaling the bike, it's more readily going to take you forward. It's more readily going to accomplish what you want to do in riding the bike. So in our standing, the quality of how we find support has everything to do with the quality of contact of the soles of our feet with the floor. And in particular, for a lot of people, especially if you've had a lot of sprained ankles in the past or some other kind of injury, there's a way that we can lose support in the arches, right? And we can be sort of falling, our feet can be falling into the ground. And that's going to affect everything above. The whole sense of really the whole skeleton is sort of falling, and it has to be, an extra effort has to be made to kind of lift you up to take a step forward. So what that means is that you're going to have to use more muscular effort if you don't have clear support in your connection to the ground. Now, ideally, and you've heard this idea before, there's a kind of alignment where one bone of the skeleton is kind of stacked right up on top of the other. So the first stage of things is how are we connected to the ground, but then internally, the skeletal alignment, same thing. So like if you look at someone and they have their head kind of constantly falling off the top of the spine, they're losing the fight with gravity. Right? And so again, that's a downward pressure that is going to require the muscles in the body to work harder rather than taking advantage of the skeleton through the kind of alignment where the skeleton really does most of the work. So that's what we're looking at improving today. Now, we're going to do one thing in today's awareness through movement lesson that involves some palpation. In other words, some self-touch. And I just want to briefly show something. I have a model skeletal leg here. And I'm going to show you a couple things. They're just very general things. First of all, is just to kind of admire the foot and to see there are 26 bones in your foot. Okay. And we're not going to go through them right now, but just to get the sense that there are these 26 bones, there's over 30 different joints, and you may not be so familiar with all of these details in your foot, but the shape of your foot can change quite a bit. And if you may have seen at some point in time a video of a person who, for whatever reason, they don't have arms, and people who have been born without arms, and many of those people are able to do things with their feet that folks who rely on their hands can't do with their hands. There's an incredible dexterity of the feet that can be developed. So I only say that to kind of give you the sense that there's a lot of possibility in your feet that if, for the most part, you wear shoes all the time and you just kind of walk around with your shoes and your feet inside the shoes, there's a lot of aliveness potentially in your feet that you haven't accessed, and we're going to try to wake some of that up today. Now, what we're also going to find, as I mentioned, is that changes in the feet, they relate to more of the skeleton above. And so now if you bring your attention above the foot, you can see that in the lower leg, we have two bones, and the larger bone along the inside that lines up with the big toe side of your foot. This is the tibia. This is the larger shin bone. And we're going to do something where we're going to be touching the tibia at the top of the shin, just below the knee. And then along the outside, and you can feel on your ankle, there's these little kind of places that stick out on both sides. And you can follow along the outside of your leg, this smaller bone up to the top. And this is the fibula. And if you see up at the top, the fibula, this structure at the very top is called the head of the fibula. And there's going to be a moment where I'm going to ask you to find this structure. And you're just going to be feeling around, and you'll be able to find the head of the fibula. Okay, so we're just about ready to begin here. I'll also just let you know that most of what we're doing is lying on the back, but there will be some sitting. And if you want to raise your pelvis a little off the floor when we're sitting, that would be fine. You can put some pads underneath your pelvis for that. And the last thing that I'll say is I think you'll have a much better experience with what we're going to do today if you take your socks off, if you do the lesson with bare feet. All right? So let's begin. Please come to stand. And as you're standing, just tune into the contact of the soles of your feet with the floor. And notice, how is your weight distributed between your 2 feet? Do you tend to have more weight over 1 foot? And notice also, does the weight shift? So if you had some kind of idea of standing still and you tried to prevent any movement, that would be a very particular feeling. But if you allowed yourself to be a little bit like an upside down pendulum, so that there was a little sway, you might notice that frees up the breath a little bit when you're not trying to just stand still. But still, more or less, there may be a tendency to find your weight more over 1 leg. In any case, bring your attention now to your left foot. And in particular, how does the left foot connect to the ground? So bring your attention to the heel, to the toes. And where do you feel space underneath your foot? The inner arch is usually a little larger, but for some people that arch is fairly flat. For others, it's more lifted. Just notice overall, do you have more weight to the inside of the foot, more to the outside of the foot, more to the front or the back? And then bring your attention over to your right foot. And look for some of those same details there. And overall, as you think of how your weight is over the ground, Just notice that there's two ways that you might consider that. One is that you are sort of sinking into the ground. Your weight comes down into the ground and you feel where it sinks in. But you could consider it as if you had been suspended in the air and the ground was then raised up to connect to the bottom of your feet, as if the ground was coming up to meet you. And so these are just two different images, but they might correspond to a very different feeling. So just try on each of those ideas. And then before you come to lie on your back, walk a little bit through your room. And as you walk, again, consider, does it feel like you take a step and you sort of sink into the ground? Or can you imagine that it's almost like what happens when you jump on a trampoline and you've already come down and now you're rebounding up? And it might be that there's a little more of a sense of springing upwards over one leg. And on the other side, maybe it's more that sinking feeling. So just use walking to notice what happens when the foot connects with the ground and how does that message travel up? You get a sense of something moving all the way up through your skeleton, all the way up through the top of your head, or maybe the message doesn't travel all the way up. Okay, so come and lie on your back. As I mentioned, for what we're going to do, you probably have the best experience if you are not wearing your socks. And now bend your knees and stand your feet. And here on your back, again, tune into the connection of the soles of your feet with the floor. And as you begin to notice for your right foot, where is the pressure the clearest? Also notice, where is your right knee in relation to your heel? So the position of the knee in space might have something to do with where the pressure falls on the sole of the foot. Is the knee more to the inside, more to the outside? Does it feel like it's right over the heel? And notice the same thing for your left foot. In contact with the floor, position of the knee. Now, I asked you to stand your feet. But now, if you knew that you were going to be asked to lift your pelvis into the air, would you change the position of your feet? And don't lift the pelvis just yet, but just notice that if that idea caused you to change the feet, what was that? It probably something to do with you getting the sense of that you were going to need to bear some weight. Because as soon as you lift the pelvis away from the ground, then the connection with the ground becomes much more important. The legs have to begin doing some work. So try that now. Just make a small movement, but begin to lift the pelvis a little bit off the ground and then place it back down. And you're going to do this many times, but the point is not to lift the pelvis as high as you can. In fact, make this movement within a very small range of effort. Instead, what the movement is for is so that you can just continue this process of self-observation. So pay attention to the soles of your feet. And then when you lift the pelvis, what happens? Where does the weight go on each of your feet? You lift the pelvis, maybe just an inch off the ground would be fine. And then you place it back down and you pause so that each new movement, you can refresh your attention. Each time you place the pelvis down, you allow the sense of muscular engagement to let go before you move again. But notice, where do your knees go when you lift? Did they move to the inside? Did they move to the outside? Could be that your knees move down away from your head. And of course, it could be distinct on the left compared to the right. If you slow the movement down even more, let's say that you engage as if you're about to lift and you don't even lift, you don't even get the pelvis off the ground, but you sort of prepare and then you give up. But do that 3 or 4 times and notice the engagement of your two legs. Is it equal? Or do you sense that you're actually relying on one leg a little more? It's like you trust one leg to bear that weight more than the other. What you're doing here, it might remind you of some of the patterns you noticed when you were standing. Because of course, when you're standing, your entire body weight is over your feet. Here on your back, of course, the weight is distributed much more. But as you lift the pelvis, you bring more weight onto the legs. Okay, so let go of that now and lengthen your legs and rest. And that movement that you were doing, we'll return to it as we go along to see if the other things that we're going to explore make a difference in your experience of lifting the pelvis. So stand your feet again now. And bring your attention to your right foot. Again, notice the contact of the heel, the toes, the metatarsal heads, or what we would call the balls of the toes, that are just more at the beginning of the body of your foot. Feel the sense of the arch. Where is there space under the foot? And now very slowly lift the inner edge of your foot and put it back down. And when you do that, perhaps you move your knee out to the right. Now, can you make the movement much smaller and make the movement mostly in your ankles so that the knee stays more or less to the ceiling? Don't do a lot here. It's just a sense of a small lift along the inner edge of the foot, but keeping the knee facing the ceiling. Okay, and then let that go. And I'm going to ask you for something even more specific. And it's something that you may or may not really understand how to do at first, but we will investigate it further. So just try this idea and see what happens. So if you feel the inner edge of your foot now, you feel the big toe, and you feel that part of the big toe, which is the metatarsal head, so not out where your toenail is, but just at the very front edge of the arch. Can you make a tiny movement of lifting the inner arch, but do not lift the big toe off the floor? So it stays connected, but there's some small shift in your ankle where you feel that that space under the inner edge of the foot, it grows up a little bit away from the floor. And then you let go. So it's a kind of internal engagement that is not so much about rolling onto the outer edge of the foot. But if you like, simply imagine that someone were to reach their fingers under the arch and maybe with their other hand, they would hold the big toe down, but as if they were just lifting the arch a little bit away from the floor. Just see what you do there. If you notice you're lifting the big toe, that's not it. But don't struggle with this. Just play with it for a couple moments. Great. And now please roll to your side and come up to sit. And you can place something under your pelvis if that helps you. But you're going to sit in such a way that the right foot is standing on the floor. So you can put your left leg wherever you wish. You might put your left hand on the floor. But now place your right hand on top of your right knee. And then move your hand slowly around to the outside of your knee and feel around there. And you're looking for the head of the fibula, and that is the smaller bone on the outside of your leg. If you're not feeling a little bump there, what you could do is you could go all the way down to the outside of your ankle, feel the bump, which is the bottom of that bone, and then sort of pressing lightly along the outer edge of your leg, you come up. And it's a little more buried under the skin as you get up to the top, but right at the outside of the knee, there is a place there that you could sort of hook the pad of your thumb behind, and it would be on the outside of your knee. So the pad of your thumb would be facing forward, and you press around there and you'll find there's a little sort of a surface that you could place your thumb on. Okay. So once you have your thumb there, go back to this idea of lifting the inner edge of the foot. And although the idea is that we're keeping the big toe on the ground, if that is confusing for you at the moment, you can also just go ahead and lift the inner edge of the foot all the way off the floor. But when you do, you'll feel that something happens with the head of the fibula. You should sense that it moves up and back. It pushes into the pad of your thumb. So once you feel that, now keep the big toe on the floor, but think of doing something up in that area around your knee that draws that bone up and back. And depending on your position, and if it's comfortable, you could even perhaps reach with your left foot underneath the arch. And if you like, just gently using the pads of your left hand, you sort of press upwards under the arch, but you're trying to sense that there's a connection to what happens under the inside of your foot and the head of the fibula there, which can be pulling backwards. And then if you take your right hand, you put it on top of your knee again, and then this time slowly slide it down. And there's your kneecap there, the patella. But if you come just under it and you feel the bone, the larger bone, the tibia there at the top, and you can sort of wrap your hands around it with the fingers pointing to the inside of your leg. And just gently hold the skin, but begin to turn the skin underneath the kneecap to the outside. And you might feel it begins to pull on the actual tibia underneath the skin. And it's like you're turning the lower leg under the knee. So make sure the knee stays connected to the ceiling here. But feel too, as you do this, if something isn't changing under the sole of your foot. And you can try this turning movement a little further down your leg, or you might even hold the calf muscle on the back and turn your lower leg from behind, but you're turning away from the midline. It's an external rotation of the bones of your lower leg. And you can still have a sense of making some effort right down there under the arch. But again, keeping the big toe on the ground. So it could be a very small movement, but you're trying to get a sense here that there's a connection all the way up your leg. It's not just something the foot does, but it's an engagement through your leg. Okay, so now please go back down and lie on your back again. Bend your knees and stand your feet. And again, think of keeping the head of the big toe on the ground as you lift the inner edge of your right foot. But now you can have this richer image. So you know that to do that, something also is happening through your whole lower leg. You can imagine the turning of your shin bone underneath the knee, turning towards the outside. And you can imagine the head of the fibula, that thinner bone along the outer edge of the knee, as if it was reaching up and back. And feel also what's going on in your upper leg. So this is a very small movement, but it's sending a message up the skeleton. What happens in the groin every time you make this small movement? Can you imagine at the top of your leg, the ball of the femur engaging into the hip joint? Maybe you can feel that, maybe not so much at this point. It's okay. All right, and just pause, lengthen your legs, and feel how each of your legs rest on the floor now. So obviously been doing this particular thing with the right leg. And just notice if there's a sense of activity that's different on the one side to the other. If you roll your head gently left and right, you might even feel, although we haven't mentioned the neck at all, you might notice that there's actually some feeling when you roll the head towards the side where we were just exploring versus the other side. There may be some difference there. Okay, bring the head to the middle, stand the feet again, and now think of the outer edge of your right foot. And if you like, you can make one or two movements where you literally roll onto the inner edge and the whole outer edge of the right foot comes off the ground. But then think of the pinky toe, and not just the tip of the toe, but the metatarsal, which is further back, and just think of lifting the arch of the foot on the outside. Now the outer arch is much smaller, and so you're not looking for a big movement, but you're looking for a little engagement. And just see what you come up with. But you already know that this isn't something that just happens in the sole of your foot. But to make it clear now, roll to your side and come up and sit again. Stand the right foot. And as you did before, you can use your hands to begin to explore these landmarks in and around the knee. And what you discovered was lifting in the inner edge was a sense of a rotation in the leg to the outside. So now try turning the shin towards the inside. Again, this doesn't mean that the knee tilts inward. Keep the knee to the ceiling, but Could you use one hand just below the kneecap to gently turn the tibia towards the middle and feel what happens on the outside of your foot? And then again, on the outside of your knee, feel around with the pad of your thumb. Look for that place where you could, like you were giving a thumbs up kind of a signal, and you just place the pad of your thumb forward and you find that surface. And now, is there some small movement you could make that would take that bone away from your thumb? And it's connected to something you're doing on the outside of your foot. In fact, these movements, these tiny movements of lifting the arch on one side of the foot or the other, they can bring into movement all 26 bones in your feet. So you can imagine there's a small shifting. And maybe one way to kind of bring that alive is to think of your fourth toe, which if you were to draw a line from the tip of your fourth toe through the metatarsal going straight back, it would point to the center of your heel, because the heel is not centered in the back of your foot, it's more to the outside. And just imagine that your fourth toe was spiraling around itself. And now you can practice both the movement of lifting the inner edge and lifting the outer edge. And so as you make the movement that would lift the inner edge, you can imagine the fourth toe and the metatarsal behind the toe as if it was spiraling towards the outside of your foot, turning around itself. Use the word spiraling rather than rolling, because again, the foot stays planted. But imagine that internally along that length of your foot, that the bone was turning a little so that the inside of the bone came a little away from the floor and the outside of the bone came a little down towards the floor. And now imagine that whole spiraling in reverse as you think of lifting the outer edge of the foot. And again, you can be using your hands along the shin, outside of the knee, to feel how these movements connect further up. And then once again, come down onto your back and stand your feet. And before you do anything here, just appreciate the feeling of how your right foot connects to the ground now, and the sensation in your right leg with the feet standing, and compare that to the left. And then here on your back, again, trying to have a more complete image of the whole leg and how it participates. Just play with a few more movements of lifting the inner edge, lifting the outer edge. These movements, again, are very small. The knee stays to the ceiling at all times, but you're looking for this sense of an internal spiral that happens in the foot, that happens in the leg. And it's an engagement you can feel all the way up into the hip joint. As you alternate between the two movements, you might get a sense that one of those movements feels like there's more of a sense of engagement in the hip, and that the other movement, there's a small kind of a disengagement. Of course, the head of the femur never comes out of the joint completely, but when do you feel one of these movements creates a little push into the bottom of your spine? And is there one of these movements that seems to actually pull your spine downwards? Okay, take a rest now. And again, just appreciate the difference between the two sides. And then bend your knees, stand your feet, and begin to explore the movement of lifting the inner edge of your left foot. So begin on your back, but see how much you can recall from the details, what you discovered working with your right foot, your right leg. And then go ahead and roll to your side, come up and sit, and stand your left foot. And as you were doing, use your hands to begin to feel the other landmarks on your left leg. And so you can play with this in different ways. You can use your hands as listening devices. They just sort of rest either on the top of your shin under the knee or looking for the head of the fibula on the outside of the knee. And you can just make the movements internally in your leg, or as if you were a practitioner giving yourself a guided lesson, you can actually turn your shin with probably with your left hand, or with your thumb. Something you can try is when you find that little surface on the back of the head of the fibula, you could use your thumb to very gently press the bone forward, but then internally resist that push. So don't let your thumb win. You push the fibula forward, but you do something internally so that you feel that the fibula pushes back. And how does all of this connect to the feeling of lifting the inner edge of the left foot? Now remember, keeping the big toe planted. So there might be even a little sense of the distance between your heel and the back of your big toe where the arch is. Does it feel like it squeezes together a little bit as the arch lifts? And you might even get a sense that the knee, which is standing on top of the lower leg, when you make this movement, does it actually, the tiniest amount, does it rise up towards the ceiling slightly? Because another place where something is happening is directly underneath the bones of your lower leg. Okay, come back down and rest on your back, but then stand the feet and just keep playing with lifting the inner edge. If you like, you can pretend that you had a friend there with you and they could place one hand on top of their knee to stabilize it and keep it from tilting. And then you imagine they're helping you. They're turning your tibia under your knee. They're providing you a little bit of feedback on the head of the fibula there. You can imagine the fourth metatarsal as if it was turning around itself along the length of your foot. And then begin to play with the movements of lifting the outer edge. Again, not rolling the foot to the inside, but making an internal movement, which just has this very small sense of growing the distance from the floor in the space underneath the metatarsals, the fourth and the fifth on the outer edge of the foot. And then come up into sitting again if you like. If you prefer, you could stay on your back, but you might again appreciate to use your hands again up and sitting to explore the movement, lifting the outer edge. And then you can compare, you can lift the inner edge, lift the outer edge. If you think of the whole line of your foot along the inside and along the outside, you might imagine that one of these movements, the inner edge of the foot, it's like it's trying to reach forward, and the other one The outer edge is trying to pull back, and then you could reverse that and you might get the other movement. Right? There's a lot of different ways of imagining how these movements work, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the image itself clearer and clearer. Okay, come and rest on your back. Lengthen your legs. Just see if there's a little more of an equal feeling on the two sides now. And then bend your knees and stand your feet. And begin to lift the inner edge of both feet, keeping the big toe connected to the floor, looking for this sense of rotation inside the leg. And so as you make the movement with both feet, it would be as if the front of your shins were turning a little away from each other. Remember, the knees stay to the ceiling. Just notice if the feeling is a little clearer on one side. And if you have that sense, you could now do one leg at a time a little bit so that you can listen on the side where the pattern feels clearer, and then you can try to clarify what's missing on the other side. And then try the movement of lifting the outer edge on the 2 feet together. So again, now it's as if the shins were turning towards each other. But the knees stay to the ceiling. And on both feet now, make the movement once of lifting the inner edge and once of lifting the outer edge. And again, feel what happens up in the groin. When between these two movements do you feel like there's an engagement? You might even notice that the pelvis is changing its position on the floor slightly as you make these movements. Which of these movements feels like you are really engaging the muscles along the outside of your lower legs? And which movement feels like an engagement along the inside? And then in the upper thigh, when do you feel that you're working there? And when do you feel that you can let go a little bit? So now pause for a moment, and before you take a complete rest, find out what's it like to lift the pelvis as you did in the beginning. Does the weight of the pelvis feel the same? Or did it get heavier? Did it get lighter? What you're doing when you lift the pelvis, of course, is you are using the connection with the ground and then the bones in your skeleton all along the length of your legs up into the hip joints. So what you've done so far, has that clarified something? Now place the pelvis on the ground, and before you lift the pelvis, make that movement that we've been calling lifting the inner edges of the feet. But now, of course, we can feel that it's engagement all the way up the leg. Make that movement and lift the pelvis. And feel what that's like. How high are you lifting the pelvis? And then place the pelvis down again and make the other movement as if you were lifting the outer edges, and lift the pelvis with that kind of engagement. And if you need to, just go back and forth a couple times, but do you sense that one of these two engagements of the leg makes the pelvis feel heavier and one makes the pelvis feel lighter? Which one would you use if you were going to lift the pelvis 100 times? Which one is less work? Okay, put your pelvis down, take a rest. And now roll to your side and come up to sitting again. And this time, sit with the soles of your feet touching. So you'll have the knees out to the side. You can place your hands on the ground to help support you. And look at your feet and see the inner edges of your feet. They should be in view, right? Can you make that movement of lifting the inner edge of your feet in this position? And just like when your feet were against the floor, now your feet are together. So don't take the big toes away from each other, but make that engagement. Feel that sense of internal rotation. And maybe you feel that you move the knees a little towards the floor. And then try the movement that would be lifting the outer edges. But keep the feet pressed together. But do you feel that this movement, it begins to lift the knees a little away from the floor? And so go back and forth between these two movements. But really feel that something's happening in the sole of the feet. So don't just kind of flap your knees like you're flapping your wings, but see there's that sense of rotation. Feel this engagement all the way up into the groin. Okay, very nice. Come back down and rest on your back. And now stand your right foot. And then you're going to position your left leg a little like what you were just doing in sitting. You take the left knee out to the side and bring the left foot into the gap between your right foot and your pelvis. And then lift your right foot off the floor and place it along the inner edge of your left foot. So you're balancing your right foot on the inner edge of the left foot. If this position is difficult for you, you might want to grab something that you place under your left knee, and you can adjust the distance of your foot from the pelvis. You can even, if you need to, feel that you're sort of slightly rolled to one side, but try to find a comfortable way to have your right foot standing on the inner edge of your left foot, and the right knee is to the ceiling. And so now begin to make that movement of lifting the inner edge of your right foot, and use that movement to take the right knee towards the floor to the right. Just do a very small amount in the beginning, and then use the movement of lifting the outer edge to bring the knee back to face the ceiling again. So before we were emphasizing keeping the knee to the ceiling, but now we're using the same engagement to actually open the leg to the outside towards the floor. And it's not just falling towards the floor. So make sure that you can control the movement. And then you use the opposite engagement to stand the foot again. And just go as far as is comfortable. But also pay attention inside your hip joint, because this movement of taking the knee to the outside is about opening the hip. Can you imagine the ball of the femur gliding in the joint there? Feel this letting go on the inner edge of your thigh as you open the leg to the outside. And then again, use that pattern of lifting the outer edge to bring the foot back to stand. It's not about opening the leg as far as you possibly can, but you might find that you go a little further as you repeat. Just be happy with what you get, but really try to sense how this internal rotation is what's stimulating the movement through space. So again, it's not just sort of letting the leg fall and then hoisting it back up, but it's feeling this internal rotation, once to the outside and then to the inside. Okay, bring your legs long and take a rest. Just feel as something new in the way the right leg rests. And then stand the left foot and Just as you did on the other side, you're going to bend the right knee out to the side. You're going to bring the right foot over to the left foot so that you can place the left foot on top of the inner edge of the right foot. And again, lift the inner edge, this time of the left foot, to take the left knee outside towards the floor. And engage that movement of lifting the outer edge, but all the way up the leg, feeling an internal rotation that helps bring the knee back up to standing. Really go for control with these movements. How slowly could you do this? Imagine the movement of the head of the femur inside the hip joint. It's like a ball moving inside a bowl. Surfaces sliding inside the joint. Okay. And then let go of that. And bend your knees and stand your feet. And thinking of that engagement of lifting the inner edges of your feet. Feel that rotation go all the way up into your hip joints to help you lift the pelvis up into the air. And don't hold it perpetually up in the air, but continue practicing this movement. Place it down and then try again. And you might be lifting the pelvis a bit higher now. Notice again the knees. Can you keep the distance between the knees the same even as you lift the pelvis? And what if you lift the pelvis, not just thinking of taking it forward towards the ceiling, but think of the pelvis actually moving towards your head as you lift it. The higher you lift, the further up your back you will be bearing the weight. And notice what's happening with the back of your head, what's happening with your neck. When you lift the pelvis, do you take your chin away from your chest? Do you press the back of your head into the floor? What if your chin actually came a little down towards your chest and you felt that you could lengthen the back of your neck? And even imagine that someone had their hand on top of your head. Imagine that as you lift the pelvis, you could be pressing your head up away from your feet into that person's hand. So the movement of lifting the pelvis, it actually kind of sends you up the mat away from your feet a little bit. Okay, and take a rest. So now we'll try one last variation in sitting. Roll to your side and again, sit with the soles of the feet touching. And have your hands somewhere on the floor behind your pelvis. Point the fingers forward. And now again, engage your legs as if you were lifting the inner edge of both of your feet. And see what happens all the way up through your spine. As you do this, could you imagine as if you were trying to spin your hands away from each other, but you keep your hands where they are on the floor, but feel a sort of a rotation through your arms and see if it can lift the top of your head just slightly towards the ceiling. And now, as you make this movement, can you actually engage a little more through your arms so that you can lift your pelvis off the floor? And you can lift for just a moment and put the pelvis back down. But then the next time you lift, not only do you lift it, but think of bringing the pelvis forward towards your heels. And so you'll have to use your arms here. And see if the head can come forward as well. So it doesn't fall back, but it's as if you were going to come over the front of your feet. And just feel this very strong engagement, this internal rotation through the legs and even through your arms. Think of the breastbone going forwards and up. You might feel the shoulder blades as you make that spinning motion through your arms can fall a little bit down your back here. It's a very powerful engagement through your whole body. Wonderful. Come back down and rest on your back. And then bend your knees and stand your feet. And one last time, lift your pelvis. Let's see if that last variation in sitting, it helped you wake up a pattern that involves your whole body here. Before you lift the pelvis, you might bring your arms next to your sides with the palms down to the floor. But as you lift, turn your arms over so that the palms face the ceiling, and think of drawing your shoulder blades under you as you're lifting the pelvis. And again, with this idea that you're not only lifting the pelvis forward, but you're taking it up in the direction of your head. And the top of your head is shooting up away from your feet. If this movement is comfortable for you, if you're not feeling any strain, you could actually try making the movement more quickly, where it's more of a powerful kind of explosive movement of lifting the pelvis and shooting up the floor. And just do that if you're comfortable. And you can always come back, of course, on another day to practice the same idea and make it a little clearer. But now come up to stand. And just feel, how are you standing now? You might remember in the beginning, I asked you a question about how you're relating to the ground. Does it make more sense now to think that even though your weight rests on the ground, it's as if you're lifting up away from the ground? Not so much a sense of sinking anymore. And now, to just understand the importance of this question of how you find support, just for a moment, roll one of your feet internally. Actually, let the outer edge come off the floor and just notice what happens to your breathing. What happens to your sense of uprightness? And then restore a clear connection to the ground. And then, keeping your feet flat on the ground, just try playing with a couple of those movements of internal rotation, either to the outside or the inside. But it's a movement that it's not rolling your feet, but it's just this sense of almost like the bones turning under the skin, all the way from your feet up into your hip joints. And just see, when do you feel a little taller? When do you feel a little shorter? And to end the lesson, just take a little bit of a walk around the room. But as you walk, play with an idea here. Each time you step, rather than thinking that you're sinking into the ground, could you imagine that from the moment your foot touches, it's as if you're lifting, so that your head is just, with every step, it lifts towards the ceiling. And then with the next step, it lifts towards the ceiling. Lift, lift, lift with every step. And of course, you could exaggerate this. It might look a little funny to walk down the street with an exaggerated lift on every step, but there's a certain feeling there. And it could even be more subtle, but it's very different than walking as if you were sinking into the ground. Try that so that you can sense the difference. And then maybe just think of it like this. As you walk, how can you put the least pressure into the ground? And so it just suggests an engagement throughout your system that takes advantage of this newfound clarity in connecting to the surface below you. So I hope you enjoyed this first lesson in Volume 2 of Biological Fitness, and see you soon.